This is Guga, barbecue YouTuber and world record holding pitmaster who is known for his crazy barbecue experiments. A few days ago, he posted a video where he smoked a brisket and then rested it in beef tallow for an entire week. Now, as insane and impractical as this experiment sounds, I think that the results actually have some super helpful implications that can help pretty much anybody who wants to smoke a brisket in their backyard. And I'll get to what those implications are as we watch the video together.
This is the most popular cut of beef in American barbecue. If you guessed brisket, you got it right. And this one specifically is not that great. We're talking about Select.
Okay, so this is a select grade brisket. So for those of you who don't know, select is the lowest USDA grade of beef that you can buy in the US for human consumption. And basically this grade dictates how much intramuscular fat, or also known as marbling, a piece of beef has. So this being a select brisket means that it has very little intramuscular fat.
First thing to do is to trim it. For that, I like to start off in the edges, because once I was done with all of my trimming, this is what it looks like.
That trim looks good. A very textbook Texas style brisket trim. It looks like he learned a couple of trimming tricks when he was doing those collaboration videos with Chud's Barbecue a while back. But with that said, and I would love some pushback on this take, so if you disagree with what I'm about to say, then feel free to let me know in the comment section below. But I don't think trimming for optimal aerodynamics is necessary if you're not cooking in an offset smoker. Because in an offset, you're getting hot air blowing over the food in order to cook it. So any parts of your brisket that are sticking out, or if you have any parts that are perpendicular to that airflow, the hot air is just gonna blast against those parts that are sticking out, and it's just gonna get absolutely scorched by heat. But in any other cooker, you just don't get that kind of convection, if any. So even though I think that round shape to the brisket looks really nice, I don't think it's gonna help the brisket cook any better outside of an offset. And if you leave the lean part of the brisket square instead of rounding it out, you're gonna get much more yield, which is a great thing.
For that, I kept it real simple. A good amount of salt followed by freshly ground black pepper.
Now this may look like way too much salt to people that don't barbecue, but honestly, this is not over salty at all in my opinion. A brisket is just such a big piece of meat, it can take a lot of salt. So if you're a beginner doing a brisket at home, don't be afraid to really lay down a nice even layer of salt, because it'll just make the flavor of the meat pop. Just make sure it's coarse salt, because if you put as much salt as Guga did with table or sea salt, that brisket would suck the moisture out of your tongue. So he's smoking this brisket in his Camp Chef pellet smoker at 250 degrees. And normally I would say 250 degrees is way too hot to be cooking in a pellet smoker, because right under the cooking grates is usually the heat source, and that just gives off so much radiant heat. But this pellet smoker is vertical, so with a brisket on the top shelf like that, it's so far from the burn pot that you don't have this problem. And that is super cool. Now this is not a sponsored video, but if you guys are interested in this smoker and you also want to help support the channel, then you can check out the specs of this smoker by clicking the link in my description box.
Because once I was done, this is what it looks like.
Okay, so his brisket's done, and I noticed that the fat is like crackly and hard on the top. Now this actually happens to me from time to time when I'm cooking in my pellet grill, and it absolutely drives me crazy. Now I'm not 100% sure why this happens, but my theory is that it's either because the brisket is too small, it's too lean, or it's cooked for too long of a time at too low of a temperature, or some combination of some or all of these factors. Okay, so now that the brisket is done smoking, he is putting the brisket in a pot filled with tallow, and he's gonna keep it sealed in his oven at 150 degrees Fahrenheit for an entire week. Now, like I said before, this is a select grade brisket. Now, because of this, a rule of thumb is that the leaner the brisket is, the quicker you want to cook it and the shorter you want to rest it. And the short and skinny of why you want to do this is because a lean brisket doesn't have the intramuscular fat that's going to keep the brisket moist for a long cook or a long rest time. Because he's resting this brisket at 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and beef fat renders at around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So even though this brisket is resting, it's technically still cooking for this entire week process. So it'll be interesting to see if being submerged in beef fat will offset the dryness caused by this insanely long rest time.
Because by this time, my 1 week brisket was fully done. Take a look. I mean, it looks pretty good.
Come on, Guga, that does not look pretty good. But to be fair, some of these B-roll shots with the nice lighting and the close-ups do make it look kind of tasty.
At the same time, I cannot wait to find out how it's gonna look inside.
Okay, time for the big reveal. Extremely overcooked, which makes sense because it was cooking for like a week, but Just look at the texture of the meat. But surprisingly, still a lot of juice coming out of the brisket. I'm thinking maybe it's because the fat inside of the pot and all around the brisket while it was resting acted kind of like a water balloon, where it holds all of the water in and doesn't let it escape because oil and water repel each other. That is really fascinating. But what's weird is that on other shots, the slices look horrifically dry. It almost looks like one of those like hyper-realistic cakes or something.
But the big question is, how does it taste? Well, let's find out right now.
Now here is the deal.
Oh wow, serious Guga, he's giving the warnings right now.
Please do not try this one at home, okay?
Oh my God. Look at the anxiety and stress all over this man's face. He is just clinging to life right now. He's like, what have I gotten myself into?
Here's what I will say. Please do not try this at home. Guys, if you don't want to eat it, you don't have to. You don't have to eat this. There is a very small chance of you not going home and going straight 6 foot under.
What? He completely skips the hospital and it's just death.
I'm out. I'm gone.
Are you serious? Yes.
I'm with Angel. Like, what kind of option is that? I'm out.
Enough talking? Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. It's not bad.
It is not bad.
I guess I'm not super shocked that it didn't taste bad, because if it was rotten, they would have definitely smelled it.
One thing that surprises me is that even though it's glistening so much, it wasn't really super juicy when I bit into it. As soon as the fibers come apart, it feels kind of dry as you're chewing it. It almost kind of breaks apart like tuna.
You know, that's a good description.
Yeah, like a cooked tuna.
Okay, so it is really dry, and I expected that this would be the case even before I watched the video, because again, it's a select brisket being cooked for a week. But the thing we can learn from this experiment is that if you dry out and overcook your brisket, wrapping it in beef tallow and butcher paper is not gonna make it juicier. Because even in the highest extreme, like in Guga's experiment of being submerged in beef tallow, the brisket is not gonna absorb any of that tallow inside of the brisket. It'll just stay on the outside and soften up the bark. Also, Guga mentions in his taste test that you cannot taste the salt, the seasoning, or even the smoke on this brisket after this week-long period. So be mindful that tallowing your briskets at home will mellow out the flavors of the brisket a bit. Of course, to a much smaller degree. Now, as crazy as all of Guga's experiments are, I seriously really appreciate them, because look, he just wasted hundreds of dollars in meat and supplies. And now we have citable evidence that tallow wrapping a dry brisket will not make it juicy. So thanks, Guga. And make sure to watch the next video on your screen, because I did an in-depth review of Adam Ragusia's Texas-style brisket video. And it was... Well, just see for yourself, and I'll see you guys over there.